Today we're going to use the quadratic formula to help us find the roots of a quadratic equation. When factoring trinomials, sometimes it could be hard to do it. For example, let's look at this equation right here. Can you think of two numbers that multiply to positive 1 and add up to negative 3? Or let's look at the second equation right here. It's all in decimals. Can you actually factor that? That seems difficult. So for instances like these, you will actually use something called the quadratic formula. The formula is a foolproof method to always help you get the roots, no matter how tough your quadratic function might be. So here is the quadratic formula. X is equal to negative b plus minus square root b squared minus 4ac, all of that over 2a. Now this is a formula you have to memorize. There's no way around it. Now, when we use this formula, it usually helps if our quadratic function is in standard form. So like this. So you see your a here, that's always the number in front of the x squared. That will go over here and at the bottom. Now the b value is always the value next to the x. So that would go right here and also here. And c is always the constant. Okay, so the number that's there by itself without any variable next to it. And that's where you would put that. Here is our first question where we have to find the roots, or the x-intercepts. I'm going to do that by writing the quadratic formula first, so which is x is equal to negative b plus minus square root b squared minus 4ac, close the square root, all of that over 2a. Again, the more you write it, the more you'll remember it. Okay, so let's figure out what the a, b, and c are. So a is the number in front of the x squared, which we know is actually a1. So a is equal to 1. Now b is the number beside the x, which is positive 5. So our b is positive 5. And the c is always the constant, meaning the number by itself, which happens to be positive 6. So our c is positive 6. Now that we have this, let's actually plug it into our equation. So x is equal to negative. Now for b, that's 5 plus minus square root. Again, b squared, meaning b is 5 squared, minus 4. And let's put in the a, which is 1, and the c happens to be 6. Okay, so that part's done. Now let's write the denominator. 2 and a in brackets is 1. Now let's try to actually solve this equation. So x is equal to negative 5 plus minus square root. Now let's do 5 squared first. So 5 times 5 is 25 minus 4. And let's multiply the 1 and the 6 together, which comes to 6. Okay, square root, let's close that. And then 2 times 1, well, that just happens to be 2. All right, let's simplify this further. So negative 5 plus minus 25. And then negative 4 times 6 is negative 24. All of that divided by 2. And let's go further. Negative 5 plus and minus. And 25 minus 24 is 1. All of that over 2. Okay, I'm running out of room, so I'm just going to write the rest of it over here. Now, again, let's find the square root of 1, which we know is just simply 1. So x is equal to negative 5 plus and minus 1 over 2. Now in this case, you have two different roots. So let's go to find the first root. So x is equal to negative 5, and we're going to use the plus. So plus 1 divided by 2. So negative 5 plus 1 is negative 4 divided by 2, and your answer happens to be negative 2. So one of your roots, or x-intercept, is negative 2. Now let's find the other one. In this case, we're going to write x is equal to negative 5 minus 1. All of that divided by 2. So negative 5 minus 1 is negative 6 divided by 2, which happens to be negative 3. So that's your second root. Therefore, the roots in this equation are negative 2 and negative 3. Our next question, again, we have to find the x-intercepts, or the roots. So start out by writing the formula. Okay, and again, the more you write it, the more you'll actually remember it. All right, now that we've written the formula, let's figure out what the a, b, and c are. So the a is always the coefficient in front of the x squared, which happens to be positive 3. Now b is the coefficient in front of the x, which happens to be positive 5. So let's write that. And c is the constant, meaning the number by itself. In this case, it happens to be -2. Now that we know what those are, let's actually substitute them into the equation. So x is equal to negative, and b happens to be 5, plus minus, let's put the square root, b squared, which is 5 squared, minus 4, a in brackets is 3, and c in brackets is -2. Okay, let's close off the square root. Now the denominator is 2a, so 2 times bracket 3. Okay, now let's solve this even more. So leave the -5, plus minus, and 5 squared is basically 5 times 5, which is 25. And next I'm going to multiply this whole thing out together, which actually comes to positive 24. Okay, close the square root. All of that over 2 times 3, which happens to be 6. So let's put that 6 there. Okay, let's go further. X is equal to -5 plus or minus, and 25 plus 24 happens to be 49. So let's write that inside of the square root, all of that over 6. All right, now I'm going to write the rest of it on the side right over here. So again, x is equal to -5 plus minus, and now we're finding the square root of 49, which happens to be 7. All of that over 6. Now this is where we find the two different roots. In one instant, we're going to have x is equal to -5 plus 7 over 6. All right, so -5 plus 7 happens to be positive 2 over 6. Now to reduce this, we can divide both of them by 2. So the numerator divided by 2 and denominator divided by 2, which comes to 1 over 3. So that's one of your roots. Now let's find the second root. In this case, we're going to write x is equal to -5 minus 7. All of that over 6. Okay, so -5 minus 7 comes to -12 over 6, and -12 divided by 6 comes to -2. So here are your two x-intercepts, or your two roots. I'm going to change things up a bit, and I'm going to start out by finding the a, b, and c. Now a is the coefficient in front of the x squared, which is 1. And now b is the coefficient in front of the x, which happens to be -3. And b is the constant, the number by itself, which is +1. Now, once again, let's write the actual formula so we don't forget it. And now let's substitute the values. So x is equal to negative. Now b happens to be -3, so put that in bracket. Okay, you want the negative and the -3 to be separate. Then plus minus b squared, so in brackets, we're going to write -3 squared, minus 4, bracket 1, and c, which would be bracket 1 again. Close the square root, and let's write the 2a, so 2 bracket 1. Okay, so x is equal to, wait a minute, you've got two negatives beside the 3. That's going to make it a positive. So we're going to write +3 plus minus square root. Now -3 squared, -3 times -3 is +9. And let's multiply this whole thing together, which actually comes to -4. Close the square root, and 2 times 1 is just 2, so we're going to write 2 at the bottom. Okay, let's simplify this more. 3 plus and minus. Now 9 minus 4 is 5, so put that in the square root, all of that over 2. Now here's something special. -5, if I were to take the square root, I would get a decimal, meaning it's not an exact number because I might have to round up or down. So in your homework, if they ask for the exact form, leave your answers in the square root formation. So one of the x-intercepts would be 3 plus square root 5 over 2, and the other x-intercept would be x is equal to 3 minus square root of 5 over 2. So we're not rounding everything here, everything is exact. Now let's find the approximate form. So I'm going to put that over here, and this is where we actually take the square root and round it up or down and have a decimal. So in one case, x is going to be equal to 3 plus, and let's find the square root of 5, which comes to about 2.24. Okay, all of that divided by 2, and x is equal to 5.24 divided by 2. And when you do this, you get approximately 2.62 as your answer. Okay, so here we just rounded the numbers to 2 decimal places. Now the other x-intercept or root, you're going to do 3 minus 2.24 divided by 2. So x is equal to, that comes to about 0.76 divided by 2. And when we calculate that, we end up with about 0.38 as our answer. So in the approximate form, your x-intercepts are 2.62 or 0.38. And in the exact form, you want to leave your answers in the square root formation. Okay, so we are not rounding up or down, we're leaving it as exactly as it is. Once again, I'm going to start off by finding A, B, and C. A happens to be positive 1. B happens to be negative 2. And C happens to be positive 3. Next, let's write the quadratic formula. And now let's substitute. So we write negative, and B in brackets is negative 2 plus minus square root, and negative 2 squared minus 4 times bracket 1 times bracket 3, and close the square root over 2 times 1. All right, now remember you've got two negatives here, so that's going to make it a positive 2. Plus minus negative 2 squared is positive 4, and I'm going to multiply this whole thing out, which comes to negative 12. Close the square root, all of that over 2 times 1, which is just 2. And now let's simplify further. Plus minus 4 minus 12 happens to be negative 8, all of that over 2. Now, if on your calculator you were to type in square root of negative 8, you would get an error, meaning it's not possible. Well, actually, later on in higher math classes, you will learn that you can turn the negative 1 into an imaginary number to actually make it possible. But for our class, we are just going to say you cannot find the square root of a negative number. So there are no real roots, meaning this graph does not even touch the x-axis. Now our last question is a word problem. It says solve the following equation for D, the horizontal distance for a bike jump to the landing point to the nearest meter. So this equation right here is basically a parabola. This is what it looks like upside down. And at the end right here is our landing point, which is what we need to figure out. Now it says horizontal distance. So basically we are looking at the landing point and we're trying to figure out the distance horizontally to the landing point. So again, we're going to start off by writing down the quadratic formula. And now I'm just going to substitute the A, B, and C. So the B here happens to be 2.5, so negative 2.5 plus minus square root and 2.5 squared minus 4. And A happens to be negative 0.2, so in brackets I'm going to write negative 0.2. Close bracket, and C happens to be positive 8, so I'm going to write positive 8 in the second bracket. All of that over 2 times negative 0.2, close bracket. Now let's simplify. So leave the negative 2.5 as it is, and 2.5 squared comes to about 6.25. Okay, now let's multiply this whole thing together, and you get positive 6.4 as your answer. Close the square root, and let's do 2 times negative 0.2, and that comes to negative 0.4. All right, let's further simplify. Leave the negative 2.5 as it is, and let's add 6.25 plus 6.4, and you end up with about 12.65. All of that over negative 0.4. All right, so now let's look at the two x-intercepts or roots that we come across. In one of them, x is going to equal to negative 2.5 plus, and the square root of 12.65 is around 3.56. All of that over negative 0.4. Now, if I were to calculate that whole thing, I would come across negative 2.65 as my answer. And because it's in meters, don't forget to write that. Now the second root is going to be negative 2.5 minus 3.56 over negative 0.4. Now if I were to calculate that all together, I would come with about 15.15 meters as my answer. Now we are trying to find the landing point. It doesn't make sense for it to be negative 2.65. That just doesn't make sense. So that is inadmissible, meaning our landing point is 15.15. but they want it in nearest meters, so therefore the horizontal distance for the bike jump is 15 meters.